Tim sat at his small dining table, flicking the corner of a printed announcement from his office. Mandatory costume party. Dress as your opposite. The memo was bright orange, covered in cartoonish bats and witches, complete with large black letters informing every employee that attendance was not merely encouraged, it was required. He tilted his head at the bold phrase. Even in an office known for odd team-building exercises, he felt this was taking things to another level. He set the paper down and stared at it for a moment. By nature, Tim was unassuming and had a history of not bothering too much with social events. He'd always loathed drawing attention to himself. The very idea of dressing in anything outlandish made him uncomfortable. But this was mandatory, and dress as your opposite left little wiggle room. His usual quick fix for past Halloween events, like popping on a cheap plastic mask, wouldn't cut it now. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a sense of dread that he couldn't escape. "Dress as my opposite?" he muttered, leaning forward in his chair and scanning the bright page again. "What does that even mean for me? The easiest route is, what, a complete contrast to my usual clothes?" Tim was used to simple outfits. A neat blue button-down, dark slacks, and maybe a plain watch. He rarely wore patterns or bright colors, preferring that people's eyes drift over him rather than settle. The concept behind the theme was that each person was supposed to break free from their comfort zone. So if you were generally quiet, you'd present yourself as loud or flashy. If you usually wore dark suits, you'd show up in vibrant, fun attire. And in Tim's case, who was known for having a sort of bland, just-there presence, he suspected the party organizers wanted him to wow everyone with something extravagantly opposite. It was enough to make him want to hide. He considered ignoring the instructions, but he knew from past events that the HR team took these gatherings far too seriously. If anyone turned up in a half-baked costume, they'd be ridiculed in the friendliest but most persistent of ways until the entire day became awkward. His phone buzzed. He picked it up to see a text from Jade, a longtime friend who lived across town. "Jade, saw your office is at it again. We still on for you borrowing that outfit?" Tim sighed. Jade was the reason he even had the slightest idea of going with something that involved more effort. She often teased him about how he liked to fade into the background, and when she heard about this dress as your opposite party, she'd half-jokingly pitched the idea that Tim should go all out. To his horror, she'd suggested women's clothing. Her logic was direct. Tim was an unassuming man who never wanted to stand out. So the truest opposite would be a bold, feminine getup that nobody could ignore. He had laughed it off but never completely said no. And Jade, being Jade, had latched on to his uncertain silence as a firm yes. Staring at the text, Tim felt a churn of anxiety in his gut. Could he really do that? Would he show up at his office, let alone a mandatory event, wearing a dress and wig? It would turn heads, something he'd spent most of his life avoiding. On the other hand, the dress code was opposite. If he went in something typically loud, but still men's attire, someone might say, "That's not really the opposite," or they'd still push him to go bigger. Also, the party was the very next day. He needed a quick solution. With a resigned huff, he typed back, "Tim, I guess I've got no better plan. You said you have something simple, right? I just want the easiest option." Jade replied almost instantly, "Come by tonight." He swallowed, locked his phone, and let his eyes drift back to that memo. He whispered to himself, "This is insane, but maybe if I do it, folks will leave me alone. I'll check the box for opposite. Then I can slip away early." That evening, Tim navigated crowded sidewalks toward Jade's third-floor apartment in an older, charming building. His heart pounded at the thought of actually going through with this. She greeted him at the door with a wide grin. "You ready to try stuff on?" she asked, stepping aside so he could enter. Her apartment was bright, with a comfortable lived-in warmth. A pile of clothes was already tossed on the sofa. I can't believe I'm doing this, Tim muttered, forcing a shaky laugh. Trust me, Jade said. It'll be a story you'll tell for years. I have a couple dresses that might work, but you only need one. Also, I found this wig. It's not too flashy, but it'll cover enough of your hair. Tim frowned at the array of dresses. I'm not looking to be any beauty queen. Actually, I want the least attention possible. Jade laughed. Good luck with that. You're a man in a dress. That's going to be attention, period. But I think going with something understated will at least help you feel less exposed. She rummaged through the pile and produced a plain black dress with a modest neckline. It fell around knee length with short sleeves. It lacked any sparkling decorations or bright patterns. It looked simpler than the other items that ranged from bright red sequined pieces to floral prints. Tim felt relieved. That might work, he said, nodding at the black dress. It's got a little give to it, Jade explained, holding it against Tim's torso to gauge if it would fit. It might be snug in the shoulders, but it's probably the closest we'll get. And for your hair, she paused, fishing out a short, dark brown wig from a bag on the armchair. It's about shoulder length. If we style it just right, it'll look presentable. Tim exhaled. All right, let's see. He hesitated before heading to the bathroom with the dress over his arm. The door clicked shut behind him. His reflection in the mirror stared back, uncertain and tense. He took a moment to unbutton his shirt, fold it carefully, and place it on the bathroom counter. This felt like crossing into unknown territory. The very air in the bathroom seemed to hum with the strange novelty of what he was about to do. He slipped on the black dress. It clung in places he wasn't used to. Pulling it down to the right length, he realized it was a bit tighter around his midsection than expected, though not uncomfortably so. Everything okay in there? Jade's voice called from outside. Tim looked at himself in the mirror and grimaced. Yeah, I'm good, he replied. Steeling himself, he opened the door. Jade's eyes lit up as she gave him a once-over. Oh, that's perfect. It's not too wild, but definitely noticeable. You'll need some little accessories, maybe a pair of low heels or flats. Tim groaned. Heels? I can barely stand in my regular shoes if they're not comfy enough. It's just for a few hours, Jade teased. But if you absolutely hate it, maybe some simple flats would do. She reached for the wig and gently placed it on his head, trying to adjust it so his real hair didn't peek out too much. Then she stepped back. All right, Tim. Or should I say Tina? Really? Tim rolled his eyes. Do I have to pick a name? It'll be fun, Jade insisted. Besides, you can't just be Tim in a dress. It'll raise too many eyebrows, at least if you pretend to be your opposite, a confident, outgoing person. Nobody will question if you're in the spirit of the theme. Tim blinked. I'm not sure I can pull that off. Jade shrugged. Try a different posture. Be a bit more open, shoulders back. Come on. She repositioned his shoulders and chin. Yeah, that's it. Look in the mirror. See the difference? He did. Though he felt silly, there was something oddly liberating about concealing himself behind an entirely different look. He'd never felt comfortable standing tall, but now, wearing this costume, he almost believed he could pretend for one evening. All right, enough practice, Jade said. We'll do some finishing touches tomorrow morning if you want to come back here, or I can come to your place. Just don't bail on me, because I want to hear every detail of how your coworkers react. Tim let out a long breath. I won't bail, but if this goes terribly, I'm blaming you. Deal, Jade said, smirking. On Halloween morning, Tim woke earlier than usual. Even though his first reaction was dread, he told himself that if he had to go through with this, it might be easier to deal with it promptly rather than let the anxiety stew all day. Instead of heading straight to the office, he went over to Jade's place again. When she opened the door, she waved him inside with a flourish, already brimming with enthusiasm. She promptly shoved him toward the bathroom. "That's the dress," she said, gesturing toward where it hung from the shower curtain rod, steamed and wrinkle-free. "Everything is ready." Tim changed into it, then allowed Jade to assist with the wig. To Tim's surprise, Jade even insisted on subtle makeup, a little foundation, a hint of blush, some eyeliner. He balked at the idea, but she reminded him that he should commit to the costume or else it would look half-hearted. After a few minutes, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. He sure didn't look fully like a typical woman, but the transformation was enough to cast doubt on immediate recognition from casual acquaintances. Finally, Jade handed him a pair of slip-on shoes. They weren't exactly high heels, but they had a slight lift. Tim wiggled his toes, concerned about how stable he'd feel. The shoes didn't pinch as much as he'd feared. Standing up, he tried a cautious step. "All right," Jade said with an encouraging nod. "I think that's about as good as we'll get. I have a spare coat if you want to wear it over everything. That might help you feel more comfortable walking to the bus or your car. Then you can take it off when you get to the party." Tim took the coat gratefully. "Thank you. This is going to be a day I won't forget." He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a bizarre dream. The wool coat covered much of the dress, so he could at least move through the city without too many stares. But the wig was obvious, and he realized with slight embarrassment that passers-by might do a double take. Emboldened by Jade's playful grin, however, Tim marched forward. He told himself that by the end of the day, everything would be over. The office required this, and he'd meet the requirement. Then he could fade back into comfortable anonymity. When Tim arrived at the office building, he lingered by the main doors, staring at the glass reflection. A handful of co-workers walked past, dressed in various costumes. One man was wearing bright neon colors to contrast his usual gray suits. A woman who was typically chatty was silent, clad in something reminiscent of a monk's robe. It was interesting to see how people interpreted dress as your opposite. Tim took a deep breath and moved inside, stepping carefully so as not to topple over. He managed to reach the elevator without drawing too much notice, though he did catch one coworker glancing at him, looking puzzled. Inside the elevator, he pressed the button for the 16th floor. It was only when the doors slid shut that he let out a shaky breath. "This is insane," he whispered to himself. The elevator paused on the 8th floor, letting in a few employees from the marketing department. Two women in bright, flamboyant suits stepped inside. They gave Tim a quick smile and resumed their conversation. Neither seemed to recognize him as Tim, which was both a relief and a bit surreal. At the 16th floor, Tim exited, bracing himself. The corridor was alive with costumes, pirates, clowns, some outlandishly formal outfits worn by co-workers who usually dressed casually. The usual hush of the office was replaced by light-hearted chatter. Right away, people turned to look at him. He felt his pulse spike. A cheerful woman named Clarissa, who typically wore black turtlenecks and serious expressions, was wearing a sparkling disco ensemble. She approached him with a wide grin. "Hey, new face," she said brightly. "Are you lost?" For a split second, Tim forgot to modulate his voice. I'm Tim," he croaked, catching himself. Then, in a breathy attempt to sound different, he squeaked, I'm Tina." He felt his cheeks burn. Clarissa laughed. "Oh, that's hilarious. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. I just didn't recognize you. Is that you, Tim? Wow, I did not see that coming." She reached out and pretended to admire the wig. "You really went for it." Feeling sheepish, Tim shrugged. "Yeah, I guess so." He tried to speak quietly to keep from drawing too much attention. "It was Jade's idea. She said it counts as my opposite." Clarissa nodded, still beaming. "It sure does. Wait till everyone sees you. I love it." Then she gestured around the hall. Management decided to set up the party decorations in the large conference room. They'll probably do that costume contest at midday, so be prepared. You'll definitely be a contender." Tim's stomach flipped. He gave an awkward half laugh. "Oh, I doubt that," he said weakly. "It's just a dress." Clarissa winked. "Sure, but we all know you're usually the last one to do something like this. I think people will be impressed you took such a big leap. See you around, Tina." She walked off, leaving him to wonder if he'd just made a huge mistake by going so far outside his comfort zone. Tim tried to keep his head down, an odd choice considering the wig, while making his way to his desk. A few more curious stares and knowing smiles popped his way, but no one seemed negative. In fact, a lot of them seemed genuinely pleased or amused that Tim had broken his mold. At his cubicle, Tim carefully removed the coat and draped it over his chair. Then he smoothed the front of his dress and tried to log into his computer. He hoped to vanish into the screen, continuing his normal tasks. But before he could settle, a boisterous voice boomed from behind him. "Well, well, well, look who's giving us a run for our money." That was Damien from accounting, a large presence in the office, both physically and personality-wise. He was dressed in an extremely prim outfit, like a stereotypical conservative academic, to contrast his usual flamboyant Hawaiian shirts and laid-back persona. Tim forced a smile. "Yeah, hi, Damien." Damien let out a jovial laugh. "Tim, you've outdone us. I never imagined you'd actually go all out for this theme. Good on you. Isn't it great to step out of your usual zone? Tell you what, this is what these events are all about, right?" He gave Tim an enthusiastic pat on the shoulder. Tim twisted in his swivel chair. "Sure, I guess so." He resisted the urge to revert to his usual subdued style of speaking. Instead, he tried to maintain a calm, even voice, one that was only slightly higher than normal. He didn't want to overdo it, but he also didn't want to sound too much like his everyday self. Damien chuckled, crossing his arms. "Anyway, I'm sure everyone will be talking about you in the best way possible. If you need any help or moral support, let me know." "Thanks," Tim replied. A small part of him realized how ironically free he felt. People saw him as Tina, the enthusiastic participant, or at least as someone who was stepping outside his usual persona. That made it unexpectedly easier to chat, even with coworkers he barely spoke to on normal days. The anonymity of the wig and dress gave him a different shield than he'd anticipated. The morning rolled on. Tim worked through emails and tasks, occasionally interrupted by colleagues who wanted to compliment his costume. They called him brave, innovative, or hilarious for playing along. Some seemed surprised but pleased that he'd managed to keep it tasteful rather than a gag. He found himself having more interactions in those few hours than he might normally have in a week. He even had a short conversation with a team leader named Serena, who complimented the little details and asked if he did the makeup himself. Tim admitted Jade had helped him, which led Serena to laugh and share a story about her own fiasco with fake eyelashes. It was bizarre how people's behavior changed. Colleagues who typically breezed by him with barely a nod were now stopping to chat. The office's usual tension was replaced with a spirited sense of curiosity and fun. Tim realized that he wasn't just wearing a costume. He'd inadvertently stepped into a role he hadn't known he could fill. Around midday, the announcement came over the intercom. "Attention, everyone. We'll have our costume contest in 15 minutes in the East Conference Room. Please make your way there." Tim's entire body tightened with apprehension. He hoped he could just hide and skip it, but Clarissa popped up by his desk almost immediately. "Come on, Tina," she teased, hooking her arm through his. "No skipping. You'll want to see everyone else's costumes at least. Don't worry, you just stand in line with the rest of us. They'll call out some finalists, maybe hand out some silly certificate or prize, And that's it. Tim let himself be guided down the corridor. He noticed others filing into the spacious East Conference Room, a large, wide space dotted with chairs set up in rows, a small podium at the front, and a couple of staffers carrying clipboards. They were presumably the judges or the party committee. "Everybody take a seat," one of the organizers called out. "We'll do a quick runway-style walk for anyone who wants to highlight their costume. Then we'll have you sit and watch our top contenders get called up. Don't be shy." The crowd bustled with excitement. Tim gingerly settled in a chair near the front, next to Clarissa. He crossed his legs without thinking, which made him realize again the difference in attire. The dress pulled a bit around his thighs, but he did his best to sit comfortably, hoping no one was staring. Clarissa elbowed him playfully. "Look at that posture," she joked. "You're a natural." The next few minutes were a whirlwind. People took the makeshift stage, explaining their opposite in comedic ways. A quiet intern had dressed as a flashy pop star. A relentlessly punctual co-worker had come in pajamas, slippers, and messy hair to show the opposite of her usual prim self. Laughter and light applause filled the room with each new reveal. Tim tried to remain inconspicuous, but eventually, the volunteer hosting the event, an HR manager named Miriam, peered out at the crowd and gestured at Tim. "We have to see this one up close," she said. "Tim, stand up. Give everyone a better look. That's definitely an opposite if I've ever seen one." A wave of heat rushed up Tim's neck. Clarissa nudged him, and so he reluctantly rose, half waving at the onlookers. Several people clapped and cheered. A smatter of encouraging whistles echoed off the walls. "All right," Miriam said, stepping closer with her microphone. "Tell us what inspired this costume." He stared at the mic, throat dry. "Well," he began, doing his best to keep a light, slightly feminine lilt. "Everyone knows I'm not usually the biggest fan of loud outfits, so I guess this is definitely different for me." That earned a round of chuckles. He couldn't bring himself to say much more, so he smiled bashfully and sat down the moment Miriam stepped away. Before he could dwell on his discomfort, the host moved on, highlighting more staff members. Eventually, the contestants were told to remain in the room while the judges had a brief huddle in the corner. Tim was sure the winner would be someone else. Perhaps the co-worker who came as a flamboyant rock star, or the manager who turned himself into a comedic version of a bohemian painter. Tim was just relieved he'd survived his brief moment of focus without losing his composure or giving too much away. Yet part of him felt a low hum of pride. He'd done something he never thought he would. Moments later, the HR manager returned to the podium, tapping the microphone for attention. "All right, folks. I want to thank you all for your creativity. It's been fun seeing how each of you interpreted the theme. However, we have to pick a winner for best costume. We tried to consider creativity, effort, and how clearly you conveyed your opposite. The votes are in." The crowd hushed with playful tension. Tim sat back, expecting to applaud for someone else. "And the winner is..." The HR manager paused for effect. "Tina, also known as Tim, right here on the front row." Raucous cheers erupted. Tim's stomach dropped. He stared wide-eyed as Clarissa practically shoved him out of his chair to stand up. The wave of applause that greeted him felt unreal. A big grin was plastered on Clarissa's face as she clapped vigorously. Others near him patted him on the back. He forced a wavering smile, panic flashing in his mind. "Come on up," Miriam called from the podium. "Grab your prize and say a few words." Tim wasn't sure he could manage more than a feeble "thank you," but the room was expectant, and his mind spun with the realization that if he talked too much or used the wrong tone, the entire office would hear his real voice loud and clear. He tried to calm his breathing as he made his way to the podium. He caught sight of the reflection in the window behind the stage. A person in a simple black dress, with a subtle wig, looking just different enough to raise eyebrows if someone hadn't already realized it was him. Miriam handed him a small trophy, a novelty plastic piece shaped like a pumpkin, along with a gift card for a coffee shop. Her eyes shone with a mixture of humor and genuine admiration. Tim wanted to vanish, but with so many eyes on him, he forced himself to speak into the microphone, adopting that gentle voice he'd been using all morning. Wow, thank you, he managed, hearing his own voice crack slightly. The microphone amplified the slight warble. I really didn't expect this. I've never been much for costumes, so this is a new experience for me. I appreciate the support. You're all great coworkers. Thanks again. The brief speech seemed to satisfy the crowd, who cheered loudly in response. Tim stepped back from the microphone and hurried off the makeshift stage, heart hammering. He could feel the flush in his cheeks. Miriam congratulated him with a quick pat on the shoulder as he made his way past her. Clarissa, Damien, and a handful of others were cheering, wearing big smiles, looking genuinely thrilled. Tim could only manage a self-conscious grin in return. He hoped that, with the announcement done, people's attention would soon move on to the next activity. But the aftermath was immediate. A cluster of coworkers gathered around him, congratulating him, teasing him in good spirit about how well he could walk in those shoes, or how they never pictured him pulling off this outfit so convincingly. Each bit of praise blended into a blur in Tim's ears. He nodded, thanked them, and tried to keep the conversation short. Eventually, the crowd dispersed, and Tim escaped the conference room. Yet as he returned to his desk, he couldn't ignore the satisfied buzz swirling through the office. He'd made more of an impression in one day than he had in months. People were texting friends in other departments. "Check out Tim's costume!" He overheard snatches of conversation as he walked by, referencing Tina, the new Tim, or our usually shy coworker who rocked a dress. For a man who had spent so long actively avoiding the limelight, Tim felt both overwhelmed and oddly invigorated. He was relieved that no one seemed to be mocking him or reacting negatively. But now, those interactions kept coming. People he'd barely spoken to before popped by his desk, wanting to share a laugh or say how hilarious or gutsy his costume was. After lunch, Tim tried to bury himself in real work, answering emails and updating spreadsheets. But focusing was tough. Every so often, a coworker would show up to chat about the outfit or to ask if he felt different. He found himself opening up more than usual, albeit carefully. The costume was performing like a magic trick, letting him be more comfortable as a participant in the office atmosphere. And that was something he'd rarely felt. Integrated, included, maybe even liked. He realized that typically he was so reserved that people might have thought he preferred being alone. Now they discovered he could be approachable. The entire dynamic was changing in small but noticeable ways. He was in the middle of responding to a client email when a gentle knock on the wall of his cubicle made him look up. It was his boss, Mr. Gilbert, a tall, silver-haired man with a strict but fair reputation. Tim swallowed hard. He'd been dreading this. He hadn't yet seen what Mr. Gilbert was wearing. It turned out that the boss had chosen to dress in a cheerful t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, contrasting the usual tailored suit. The casual outfit was still pressed immaculately, but for Mr. Gilbert, it was definitely out of character. "May I come in?" Mr. Gilbert asked. His tone was polite, but Tim felt a twinge of nerves. "Yes, of course," Tim replied, adjusting his posture. He noticed that Mr. Gilbert's gaze flickered to Tim's outfit, then up to Tim's wig. There was no open disapproval or confusion, more like an analytical curiosity. Mr. Gilbert cleared his throat. "I heard you won the costume contest. Congratulations. I know these activities might seem silly, but the idea behind them is to encourage employees to explore new sides of themselves. It's good for morale. I must say, I was surprised to learn that you participated so wholeheartedly. I don't recall you ever dressing up for previous events. Tim managed a small smile. Yes, it's definitely a first for me, sir. I'm usually not one to get involved. But the theme was compelling, I guess. He almost laughed at how mild that sounded. Mr. Gilbert folded his arms, his expression warm. It's nice to see you engaging with everyone. I know you're typically focused on your work, which is commendable, but don't discount the value of building connections. We all work better when we feel comfortable around one another. And I have to say that costume is quite convincing. I almost walked past you earlier without realizing it was you. Tim's heart stuttered at the realization that even the boss admitted he was nearly fooled. I appreciate that, sir. I guess it goes to show how a change in appearance can change how people see you. Mr. Gilbert nodded, then softened his voice. Exactly. Well, continue enjoying yourself and remember to keep up with your tasks, of course. But overall, well done. I think you've captured the spirit of this day perfectly. Tim thanked him, letting out a silent breath of relief as Mr. Gilbert stepped away. That conversation could have been awkward or humiliating, but instead, it was positive. He was safe, for now. By late afternoon, the initial shock and chatter had died down. People milled about, finishing up their work or tidying the break area where leftover snacks and decorations lay scattered. Tim's toes were starting to ache from wearing those slightly raised shoes all day. He counted the minutes until he could slip away from the office, change into his regular clothes, and go back to a sense of normalcy. However, fate had one more twist in store. An impromptu announcement echoed through the office. The HR team wanted to get a brief acceptance speech or interview from Tim on video to upload to the company's internal web portal. Just a small clip about what it felt like to win the best costume. No. Tim groaned under his breath as a co-worker named Barry approached him with a small camera. You're joking, right? Barry shook his head apologetically. I'm sorry, but Miriam wanted it. Nothing huge, just a short clip to upload. Everyone had a lot of fun today, and you were the highlight. I promise not to keep you too long. He waved the camera in front of him. Ready when you are? Tim stole a glance at Clarissa, who stood nearby. She gave him an encouraging thumbs up. He tried to muster a smile that didn't look like a grimace. All right, he said, shifting in his seat so the camera would catch more of him in frame. Let's do this quickly. Sure thing, Barry said. He hit the record button, then held up the camera. So, Tina, Tim, congratulations again on your costume victory. How does it feel to have transformed your usual style so drastically? Tim swallowed, keeping his voice soft and a bit higher. It's been surprising, but good. I'm not used to standing out, so this was definitely something new for me. Everyone's been really supportive, which made the day less intimidating than I thought it would be. Barry grinned behind the camera. That's great to hear. Any advice for co-workers who might be too shy to participate in events like this? Tim hesitated, then forced out an answer. Maybe the biggest thing is, sometimes you have to take a chance. Doing something like this can break the ice with a lot of people. He realized only after saying it that he was basically describing his entire day, stepping out of anonymity because of a dress and a wig. Barry nodded. Wise words. Thanks for sharing, Tim. And congrats again. He lowered the camera, beaming. We'll probably post that by the end of the week. Tim felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you, Barry. As Barry walked away, Tim stared at his desk, letting the last bits of tension seep out. One more small spotlight that he'd survived. The day was finally nearing its end. A half-hour later, Tim powered down his computer, tidied his workspace, and slipped on his coat. To leave, he had to walk the corridor once more in his outfit. exchanging farewells with colleagues who looked proud or amused by his day's transformation. By the time he reached the elevator, he was thoroughly exhausted. Physically, from holding different posture and wearing unfamiliar shoes. Mentally, from the swirling attention and conversation. Yet he couldn't deny there had been moments of real enjoyment. People had been friendly, encouraging, eager to talk to him. He almost couldn't believe how easily he'd connected with folks once they saw him as Tina. When the elevator doors slid open at the ground floor, he hurried across the lobby. Outside, the crisp evening air hit him. Tim took a deep breath, scanning the street for a taxi. He could take public transportation, but at that moment, he just wanted a quick ride home. Finally, a taxi pulled up to the curb, and Tim stepped inside, giving the driver his address. The driver barely glanced at him in the mirror before pulling away from the curb, as if Tim's attire was the most normal thing in the world. That brought Tim an odd sense of relief. On the ride home, he let his head rest against the seat, watching streetlights flicker through the window. He was still wearing the wig, the makeup, the dress. It felt odd that only an hour or so earlier he had won Best Costume in front of a crowd of coworkers. He wondered if the entire day would feel like an unreal memory tomorrow. A sudden vibration in his coat pocket tore him from his thoughts. He fished out his phone. Jade's name lit up the screen. "How's my star, costumer?" Jade's voice chirped when he answered. Tim laughed quietly, mindful of the taxi driver. "I can't believe I actually did it. I won Best Costume." Her whoop of joy was loud enough that Tim had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I knew it. I want the full rundown. Did you freak out?" Tim murmured, "Pretty much, yes." It was nerve-wracking, but it was also surprisingly nice. People were friendly, teased me in a fun way. I was forced to do an acceptance speech, though, so I was worried my voice would betray me. But I muddled through. Jade snorted. "I wish I'd been there to see it. Are you headed home now?" "Yeah, I'm in a taxi," Tim said. He absently touched the wig's hair. "I can't wait to change." "Well, if you're not exhausted, drop by my place. You can return the dress, and I'll help you get all that makeup off properly," Jade offered. Tim glanced at the time on his phone. The day had drained him, but he was grateful for Jade's help. "Sure, maybe I'll swing by quickly." He gave the taxi driver her address instead of his own. Then he ended the call, leaning back into the seat, letting the city lights pass in a hazy glow. Tim rapped on Jade's door. She opened it immediately, wearing an expectant grin. He stepped inside, feeling a wave of relief as he removed his coat, revealing the black dress. She let out a low whistle. "You look comfortable in it now." He shrugged, dropping onto the sofa. "I'm more comfortable than I was this morning, that's for sure." Jade plopped down beside him. "So, any good stories from the day?" Tim huffed a laugh. "Well, I got cornered for a speech twice, once on stage in front of everyone, and once on video for the company site. So that was fun." He gave a sarcastic wave of his hand. "I talked to people I barely knew. They were almost shockingly welcoming." Jade nudged him. "See? Sometimes you just need a change in perspective." Tim nodded. He was too tired to elaborate, but she seemed to read his expression. "All right," Jade said, standing up. "Let's get you out of that wig and get your face cleaned up. Makeup remover is the only way you'll avoid weird streaks tomorrow." Tim nodded, following her to the bathroom. As Jade showed him how to gently wipe off the makeup, Tim felt the tension that had gripped him all day finally loosening. He peeled off the wig, letting out a slow breath. The edges of the wig left a faint indentation on his forehead, and his own short hair felt a bit messy underneath. Once the eye makeup came off, he stared at his reflection. His face was more or less the same as always, but the memory of being someone else for a day lingered. When he finished, Jade waited outside the bathroom door with a spare set of comfortable clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt. She motioned for him to change out of the dress. Tim quickly changed, folding the black dress neatly. It felt liberating to be back in something more familiar, though part of him experienced a flicker of nostalgia for the unusual anonymity the costume had provided earlier. He stepped out of the bathroom carrying the folded dress. "Thanks," he told Jade, "for everything. You made it all possible." She waved him off. "I just gave you the clothes. You're the one who lived through the day and apparently charmed half your office." She walked with him back to the living room. "You should be proud of yourself. You took a risk." Tim didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so he only gave a small shrug. But Jade caught the flicker in his eyes and patted him on the shoulder. "Anyway," she said with a little grin, "get some sleep, Star. Tomorrow you can go back to being plain old Tim." Her teasing tone made it clear she saw the entire day as a triumph. "Yeah," Tim agreed softly, though his mind was already replaying highlights. The look of shock on Clarissa's face, the applause at the conference room, Mr. Gilbert's nod of approval, the cluster of co-workers who'd treated him like a friend instead of a background fixture. It was a small swirl of unexpected positivity. When Tim got home, he hung the dress in a garment bag that Jade had given him and stored the wig carefully on a shelf. He showered off the remnants of the day, letting the warm water wash over him. And while he didn't want to exaggerate what had happened, he knew that the party had turned out to be more than just a silly costume event. He'd never seen that side of his co-workers, and they'd never seen this version of him. It was jarring, but it also felt like he'd tapped into a spark of confidence he hadn't known he could manage in such a public arena. He toweled off, dressed in pajamas, and slid into bed, exhausted. He expected to fall asleep immediately, but his mind wouldn't quiet. Flashes of the day kept popping up, the thrill, the slight fear, the comedic moments. He still felt a pang of mortification about that acceptance speech, how he must have sounded, how the entire office had gazed at him in a hush of anticipation. But then he remembered the applause, the smiles. It had gone better than any speech he'd ever given as himself. Oddly enough, it seemed that Tina had captured everyone's attention in a way Tim never had. After a while, he drifted off into a deep sleep, worn out by the swirling memories of a day that had shattered his normal routine. The next morning, Tim woke to the chirping of his alarm. He checked the time, 7:30 a.m., another workday. He rubbed his face, the pillow's crease marking his cheek. As he got dressed in his typical slacks and button-down, he found himself wondering if colleagues would treat him any differently now. Would they expect him to be more talkative, more open? He shrugged the thought away. He'd find out soon enough. Climbing into his usual shoes felt like a relief, and yet he couldn't ignore that a small part of him missed the comedic outpouring of attention from the previous day. That was new territory, people being excited to talk to him. The drive to work was uneventful. The city seemed calmer, the bright orange decorations on doorsteps and shop fronts looking a little less vivid in the aftermath of Halloween. Tim arrived at the office, stepping into an elevator filled with coworkers who were back to their usual attire. Some nodded in greeting, others stared at their phones. He felt an odd sense of displacement, as if the day before had been a dream that temporarily warped reality. When he reached his desk, he found Clarissa waiting for him, leaning against the cubicle partition with a playful grin. She was back in her all-black ensemble. "Morning, Tim," she chirped. "Or should I say Tina?" He rolled his eyes with a small smile. "Let's keep it at Tim for now. I think my wig-wearing days are behind me." She laughed, a melodic sound that echoed in the still quiet corridor. "That's too bad. I think you earned more confidence points yesterday than the rest of us put together. You were the talk of the office by the afternoon. People were texting me asking, 'Did you see Tim's getup? That was epic. I'm impressed.'" Tim typed his login credentials, shrugging. "Thanks. I think I'm still recovering from the shock. Probably going to keep a low profile today. Clarissa gave him a light nudge on the shoulder before walking away. Sure, but don't be a stranger. Yesterday proved you can have fun. With that, she headed off to her own workspace. Tim settled in, scanning his emails. The usual flood of messages greeted him, but one subject line stood out. Video from the costume contest. He blinked, clicking on it. An email from Barry announced that the short video featuring Tim's acceptance speech was live on the company's internal web portal. Tim's pulse kicked up. They actually posted it. Before he could overthink it, Tim opened the link. The page displayed a short highlights reel. There was background music, shots of various people's costumes, and sure enough, a clip of Tim at the podium. The camera had captured his nervous look, the small trophy in his hands, and that fleeting moment where he began speaking in a soft voice. Watching himself from that outside perspective, Tim felt a swirl of embarrassment and a strange sense of pride. The comments section below the video had entries from coworkers. "You nailed it, Tim. Amazing costume. Hilarious and impressive," and so forth. It was surreal reading these compliments, especially since some were from colleagues he'd never had a real conversation with. He closed the video, feeling a mixture of flustered and gratified. Maybe he had won more than just a trophy. People seemed suddenly more at ease around him, as if wearing that dress had unlocked something that encouraged them to approach him. He tried to push that out of his mind, focusing on his tasks at hand. Still, over the course of the day, that shift in atmosphere was impossible to ignore. A few more co-workers than usual passed by his desk to chat or crack a joke, and the sense of belonging that had stirred yesterday lingered in small ways. Even Mr. Gilbert, back in his usual suit, dropped by Tim's cubicle just before lunch, offering a quick comment about how the entire day had been a success, and how Tim's involvement proved the company's team-building activities had value. Tim responded politely, feeling more at ease than ever speaking with his boss. Around midday, Jade texted him, asking how the post-costume day was going. Tim typed back a summary. "Weirdly positive. People are still talking about it. Couldn't be happier that it's over, but also didn't hate it. Hard to explain." Jade responded with a triumphant row of clapping emojis. "You survived, and you gained a bit more openness with your coworkers, right?" Tim typed a quick, "Yes, thanks again," then set his phone aside. He glanced at his reflection in the blank screen of his monitor, noticing the usual short brown hair, clean-shaven face. It occurred to him that less than 24 hours ago, he'd stared at himself wearing a wig, a dab of eyeliner, and a dress. The memory felt like a strange, amusing chapter of a book he'd never intended to read. The afternoon slid by in a steady rhythm of work. More than once, he overheard co-workers referencing some comedic snippet from the previous day. Someone teasing Damien about his normally flamboyant shirts, someone else joking about how comfortable pajamas could be. And in the midst of it, Tim realized that no one was avoiding him or teasing him cruelly for wearing that dress. The chatter was good-natured, respectful, even encouraging. He actually found himself smiling quietly while sifting through spreadsheets, the office noise a comfortable backdrop. By the end of the workday, as Tim shut down his computer and grabbed his jacket to head out, he took one last look around. The holiday decor had been mostly removed, just a few remnants of fake spider webs in the corners. The day after Halloween always felt like the mood was shifting back to normal. But Tim had a lingering sense that he'd left a small mark on this place, on these people, and maybe even on himself. He walked out into the crisp autumn air. The sun was dipping behind distant buildings, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Tim smirked at the memory of orange, the color that, on a flyer, had threatened to push him into a day of embarrassment. Instead, it turned into something that expanded his view of what he could handle. A block away, he spotted Clarissa exiting the building. She waved when she saw him. "Heading home?" "Yeah," Tim called back, adjusting his jacket collar. "You?" She nodded, stepping to match his pace. "You know, a few of us are going to grab coffee tomorrow after work. You should join, since you're now the star of the department," she joked, rolling her eyes playfully. Tim let out a light laugh. "Star might be a stretch, but I'd be happy to join, sure." They walked together for a few blocks, chatting casually about some upcoming deadlines. Clarissa peeled off to catch her bus, leaving Tim to walk alone again. Except now, the city streets didn't feel as isolating as before. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, letting a small, contented grin spread across his lips. The next few days would probably see the office revert to typical rhythms, but Tim suspected a part of him might remain changed by the costume fiasco. He had endured the nerves of the event, faced the spotlight, and discovered that maybe it wasn't as terrifying to be seen, truly seen, by everyone else, even if that happened thanks to a borrowed dress and a wig named Tina. He strode off toward the subway entrance, the hum of traffic underscoring his thoughts. He could still picture the moment up on stage, heart pounding, the hush of the room, the microphone in his hand, and recall the burst of acceptance from everyone in that conference room. The trophies and photos might gather dust, but the memory of stepping outside his usual boundaries would stay with him. As he descended the steps underground, he decided maybe it was all right to sometimes take that chance, break the mold, and meet the world with a new face, even if it was just for one day. He wasn't certain how the future would unfold, but at least he knew he could greet his coworkers tomorrow without any dread. They had seen him at what he once considered his most vulnerable and opposite self, and instead of laughing him out of the room, they'd applauded. The train rumbled in, squealing to a stop. Tim stepped aboard and grabbed a pole for balance. Doors slid shut, and the car lurched forward. In the reflection of the glass, he caught a glimpse of a faint smile on his face. It was the same person he'd always been, but with a new memory behind those eyes, the memory of playing Tina for a day, a memory that gave him a deeper understanding of how many sides a person could have. He steadied himself as the train accelerated, letting that final thought settle. He'd walked a mile in someone else's shoes, literally, and for once the next step in his life felt just a little bit brighter.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.